Good morning. So this title may sound a bit pretentious, roadmap to Graphemics. In fact, I just wanted to provide some ideas for discussion and maybe make some kind of synthesis, some kind of thread to follow. So, as it has been said many times in this conference, Ferdinand de Saussure in 1916 wrote some quite nasty things about written language. So this written image will usurp the main role, and looking at writing is like looking at a photograph of somebody instead of viewing him directly. Writing obscures language, it's a disguise, and so on. So no wonder linguistics after that wouldn't consider writing in a favorable way. 70 years later, Nina Katash, French linguist who has worked a lot on orthography, said exactly the opposite, that linguistics has, among other current and urgent tasks, also the task of integrating graphemic studies to its concerns. So that was in 1988. And what about today? So I will start by trying to establish a symmetry. So the least we can do is ask ourselves, okay, there has been a century working on phonetics and phonology. Couldn't we have something symmetric? So I found a definition of phonetics, as you can see, science which studies the characteristics of human sound making. And maybe we could define something symmetric, which symmetrically we would call graphetics. And I just replaced the word sound by the word drawing, and speech by writing, and transcription will be, in the other sense, oralization. This looks quite nice, it's symmetric. And of course, you may have thought already, yet another term, good heavens. So yesterday I saw on the screen Graphemics, Graphematics, Grammatology already. Today, grapholinguistics. So life is short. This talk is also very short. It's part of life, but it's short. And so to avoid the naming issues, I will use a graphemic way. I will just write a phi and a gamma. After all, it's Greek origin, so I will use Greek letters. And it's a meta name, so you can place anything you want at the place of gʁafematik. And now I establish the symmetry. Okay, so let's look at the contents of this definition. It talks of drawings used in writing. So what are these drawings? We can make the hypothesis that we write using strokes, although this has to be proved. Others may use surfaces, but let's say it's strokes. We can delimit production in a box because we'll not take text of indefinite length. Inside a box, we can define a grid because, after all, our strokes have some level of accuracy. We can set boundaries of complexity, as this has been done. So, for example, the character Professor Kuhlmann showed was some kind of maximum of complexity in some sense, so we can place this. And we get a number of possible drawings, which is big, very big, but not infinite. It's certainly bigger than the number of sounds a human can produce. And Martin Durst has already made a proposal in prologue language to describe drawings. So his proposal was specific to Chinese characters, but it could easily be generalized in a more in more general context. There can be languages, markup languages or programming languages for defining arbitrary drawings, but compatible with our goal. And one can also imagine font resources, because they also have code which could be used to find all possible strokes used, and hence all possible drawings a human can make. And whatever our approach may be, we can always find an n large enough so that any drawing is a point of space r in the power of n. And once you have embedded your drawings in this space, then you just need to cluster it, and your clusters will be graphemes. Now, how do you cluster the space? It can be arbitrary, but we shouldn't forget that we have also the phi, so for phonetics, and phonetics can be an aid in clustering the space of drawings. So, for example, I took an obvious example of two letters, sh and sh, which are very close phonetically and also very close graphically. And it's the same for example, Amharic script, where vowels are just a small protuberance to consonants. And this could help us in clustering. And whatever the method, now we are arriving at the definition of gʁaology. So I will not say graphology, because the term graphology has been used by a pseudoscience. So gʁaology, how would we define this? And I take the symmetric definition of phonology, definition of sounds organized into a system of contrasts and become phonemes. So we can imagine a system of contrast for drawings and obtain γ-emes, graphemes. So what would be these contrasts? How many of them are there, and do we really need to count them? And historically there have been at least two approaches to defining graphemes. The one is the autonomistic one by Yannis. So this takes over the method of minimal pairs used in phonology. And it's autonomistic in the sense that it makes no assumption whatsoever on phonetics. Drawings are considered as something completely separate, as if we discover an extinct language or an extraterrestrial language, so we know nothing about the phonetics and we just use the graphical properties. And this can be done also by convolutional neural networks, as already mentioned yesterday. The other approach by Nina Katash, the phonographic approach, so here the term phonographic is I guess the same meaning as yesterday in the talk about kanjis, where we consider the representation of phonemes into graphemes, not solely, but as an aid to obtain this clustering into graphemes. And Richard Sprout went even further, saying that we will not take individual graphemes, but we need to take strings, and we can, from abstract sounds, we go to pronunciation using sound rules according to Chomsky's generational approach. Sprout says that from abstract sounds we can go to graphemes and then apply spelling rules to get actual spelling. So in the spelling you have the interaction of graphemes to obtain written text. And I have an example here of the French word du. So du is the participe passé participle of verb devoir. So du can be translated as due. It takes an accent not for phonetic reasons, but only to disambiguate it with the article du, de le, which doesn't take the circumflex. If you take the pronunciation is du, here in phonetic notation, the abstract sound will take an S for the plural, and so the abstract graphemes will be dus, and the spelling rule will be to add the circumflex to disambiguate. And this makes sense, and Richard Sprout says that this transformation has the very nice property of being regular, in the sense of formal regular languages. So this is already involving several graphemes, so we are now in the discipline of gʁafematik, so graphotactics. And again, I take the symmetry between phonotactics and graphotactics, with the difference that in phonotactics you have a sequential arrangement because sound is linear, normally. And otherwise, in writing, it becomes planar. Maybe not spatial yet, but at least planar. Now, these symmetries are very nice, but this is the way linguistics studies language. And we cannot avoid institutionalization. So what happens is that while, and this Ferdinand de Saussure said already, we learn to speak spontaneously, but somebody teaches us how to write. And when you teach something during centuries and millenaries, then you formalize it, you standardize, and it becomes an institution. So you have those who teach language, those who have the power over these people, and writing, reforming it, defining it, maybe forbidding it, is a form of power. So using a writing system, which means teaching, verifying its conformity, avoiding divergence, is a means of enacting power. And many writing reforms have shown exactly this, either as a power demonstration or whatever. So, if we want to study graphemes, the linguistic way is nice, it's innocent, pure, but you also have to consider institutionalization, and you have to confront your study of a writing system with the institutional version, sometimes the wannabe version of the writing system. So, this is kind of a parenthesis question: is institutionalization almighty? And how do people feel about their writing system? So, question, is writing perceived as cultural heritage? And I'm focusing a bit on the West. So I have two elements of answer. The first one is the Voyager mission, which is supposed to represent human heritage. Well, believe it or not, there is no written text. There are hundreds of sounds, images, but no text. There is a 1 hour record of heartbeats of the wife of Carl Sagan, but no text, except for this small text written by Jimmy Carter, who insisted, and being President of the United States, he came through with this, and it's typewritten. So this is the only typewritten text representing the human race in space. So I will not even enter the content. The form already shows you the level of this. And take another example, the UNESCO Intangible Cultural Heritage of Humanity. there are 470 different cultural heritages, and only one is a writing system. And it's not even Korean Hangul. It's Georgian, and there are 3 scripts, so it's less than optimal because you have a lot of redundancy, but they are very beautiful, it's accepted, but only one. Instead of that, you have cultural heritage of humanity, which is the Turkish whistled language. But of course, Ferdinand Saussure had nothing against whistling, so this one is a cultural heritage, but not writing. Now, institutionalization is not only a state affair, you also have the computer industry. So here you see the first teletype, so the first machine writing on paper, text, and the first screen in 1962, 1964. So to print and display text, you have to store it somewhere. And to store it, you have to define graphemes. You maybe not know it, but that's what you are doing. And the computer does this by assigning numerical values, and this is what we call a character encoding. And Unicode is the most successful, this is undeniable, and also the most elaborate character encoding. So this means that to study graphemes, you need to confront this triangle. You have linguistic definitions, whatever method you may use. You have the institutional definitions, which are there historically and presently. And you have Unicode, which is another vertex of my triangle. And Unicode does not act in the same way. So an institution may force you to write in some way. Unicode will not force you, but it may sometimes not give you the means of doing otherwise, for technical reasons, of course. The vocabulary is a bit different. Unicode doesn't define graphemes, but characters. And characters have properties. Among these properties, you have names. So, for example, you have a character called Latin capital letter A, which makes sense. Sometimes names make less sense, like a double low 9 quotation mark. And of course, for the entire set of Chinese characters, you have no names. So Unicode is kind of a study of graphemes, but it's not a scientific discipline, because scientific disciplines evolve and progress. Unicode has a feature which I like to criticize. It's that everything is permanent. So all the normative properties of characters are permanent and immutable. And this is an example showing this quite well. We are in the table of Byzantine music, and you have about 15 characters, all called phthora, because phthora is going down in music. And phthora is always written like this, except for one case where it is written like that. So every sensible human being will tell you that this is a type error. And type errors normally should be corrected. Not for Unicode. Unicode will leave it this way and say this misspelling of phthora is a known defect. So don't come and tell us there is an error, we know it. Okay, and this behavior is exactly the same in the Hebrew Bible and the Quran. In the Hebrew Bible, whenever there is a mistake, well, maybe there was some divine intervention for this typographical mistake, so the mistake remains. And people will, or not, search for some deeper meaning of the mistake. The other weakness of Unicode, in my sense, is that it's non-probabilistic. A character has a property or not. And in the real world, this is not always what happens. So this is a picture I took in in Greece, it's the word parking. And the poor guy who wrote it, who painted it on the wall, started writing in Greek, but when arrived here somewhere, he forgot that he started in Greek and he finished in Latin script. So my question is, what is the status of these three letters? Because this one is obviously Greek. This one has a glyph, so an image both in Latin and Greek alphabet, but according to the phonetics, it's Greek because it's an R, a rho. But these have the same phonetics in the two systems. So here somewhere we have a transition. How do we encode this transition? And same problem with Arabic undotted. So yesterday we heard about undotted Arabic. And my question is, how do we encode this? Well, we can give an obvious interpretation, al-bint jamilatu. So the girl, the girl is beautiful, but there may be other interpretations, and they may be a probabilistic approach that this letter has 80% probability of being this, 20% of being something else. Now, these flows, of course, are not abstraction to use Unicode. On the contrary, it's a very good tool, but it is a tool. And this way of dealing with writing, of doing permanent choices, not accepting errors, not correcting errors, and putting this intentional and non-probabilistic mindset over writing will, I'm afraid, play an important role in the evolution of writing in the forthcoming centuries. And Graphemics, the study of Graphemics, has to take this into account. So let's go to higher levels now. We can define graphomorphology. Graphomorpheme is grapheme which represents a minimal unit of sense, like emojis, symbols, and so on. We can ask about the syntax of grapheme. So gamma syntax, graphosyntax, is it independent of phonosyntax? And here I have an example which complements what Christa Dürscheid has shown. This is an entire book written in emojis, 128 pages. And it's a story. And you have emojis, punctuation, and also emoji modifiers. As you can see, some emojis have arrows and things like that. So the emojis are lexical morphemes, and the modifiers and punctuations are grammatical morphemes. Graphosyntax can be spatial. So this is taken as a poem from Mallarmé. Un coup de dé ne peut abolir le hasard. And here the spatial arrangement carries meaning. Apollinaire, calligram, again spatial arrangement carries meaning, but this time it's also pictorial meaning. So you have and the text and the way the text is displayed, like in Arabic calligraphy. And finally, final question, can there be a thing as typographemics? To-gamma-emics. So typography has brought segmentation, standardization, and regularity. Of course, what typography can do, the human hand can do, but it's not always easy. And it makes sense to study typographemics as a special case of graphemics. And here I have some examples where things in typography give more linguistic information than the handwritten version. For example, here the absence of the ligature, FL, shows that we have two morphemes, Auflage, which we have not in Fliegen. Schifffahrt is hyphenated in a certain way. Island, the fact that it's a lower S shows that it's a morpheme, which means ice, while in Islam it's not a morpheme. Here you have two readings of the word wach, either Wachstube or Wachstube, with two different meanings, and this, of course, you don't get with handwritten text. Then typography also has the dimension of connotation. So you can see the connotation of the right wing or Nazi, and here the logo of the Greek fascist party, which use epigraphical characters. Connotation, this is a joke, a picture I took in southern France, that connotation can be misleading. It's an Indian restaurant using Hebrew characters. Okay, this is Hebrew square script. So, what is the boundary between typographemes and handwriting graphemes? And what about gamma pragmatics? Krista have talked about emojis. So emojis have started as typographotactic arrangements. They have evolved into typographemes which can still be drawn by hand, and now they have become typographic utterances because in a pragmatic context they evolve and take into account the context. So nowadays emojis take your facial expression and your skin color. So they are not independent of the context where you produce them. They become exactly what we call an utterance in pragmatics. So I will skip this, and my last slide as a roadmap, some things which I list as a list of tasks for Graphemics in the 21st century. So establish the limits of the symmetry. Is there a symmetry and how far does it go? Investigate the different grapheme definition approaches. Consider critically the role of Unicode in the history of writing. Explore new forms in writings, but always with this gamma linguistics or grapholinguistics approach. Study the increasing important role of typography, because, as I said, the Unicode is based actually on typography. And finally, convince NASA to send a third Voyager probe, this one full with text, so that we can boldly go where no man has gone before. No man has gone before. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I get the impression if we were to discuss what you presented us, we would spend the rest of the day. Which I don't think is opportune. As the chairman of the session, just a little aside, I have to reprimand you about your mean aside about the Greek spelling reform. Mm-hmm. The Voyager, yes, for everyone who's interested in studying Euro or Western centrism, that's the perfect case. The languages that are included in the discs are Western languages, with one or two exceptions. So that is indeed a very interesting case. I'm afraid
they have ancient Greek and not modern Greek.
They have ancient Greek, which is a Western language. Anyway, I think we have to leave it at that, and you will have plenty of time over coffee and lunch to discuss with Yannis his very serious and future-directed considerations, and we move on to our next speaker.